John O'Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise. I think this is the first time that I've been in Parliament that I've been able to speak on a bill that's related to trying to put things right in Christchurch. Often our Christchurch MPs or the local government select committee MPs have had this task, and it's, I guess, in some small part a way that by speaking in support of this bill, it's my opportunity as a parliamentarian to be able to contribute something towards helping to improve the lives and the ongoing livelihood of those in Christchurch. Mr Speaker, this is, I have to say, an incredibly sensible bill, and I guess a number of speakers have already said that, and the level of support that this has right across the House, I think, really iterates to me just the level of support that there is for wanting to find solutions to some of the difficulties that are being experienced in Christchurch and have been experienced since the first earthquake in 2010 and the subsequent earthquakes. There's been such a vast array of difficulties that people have faced, and of course that was highly publicised early on, with people being without water, people being without sewage, roads being a mess, people having houses that were uninhabitable, and the issues have gone on for a very, very long time. And the general public of New Zealand, I think, initially very supportive, aware of ongoing issues that have made the headlines that have been sort of widely circulated. But this is a particular issue which has significant impact for homeowners, making it difficult for them to be able to perhaps move on, or just, you basically need to know where your property begins and ends in terms of what you do with this. And this is a problem which has not been widely known by the people of New Zealand. It's not been widely talked about, but is a significant problem nonetheless for those people who are experiencing it. And so, Mr Speaker, it is, I guess, beholden upon the Parliament to take some action and rectify the situation, to put things in place to give people that level of certainty. And from my perspective, I think my understanding of this bill is that it does just that. And I think in particular, it's about taking a really practical approach to this. It's very difficult when you've had ground move, not necessarily in a uniform way, for surveyors to sort of be able to follow any of the old boundary lines, because earthquakes don't necessarily move in a straight line, and so boundaries won't be or aren't where they once were, and not easily defined. But the provisions in this bill, I think, is great. That actually there's going to be a sense of common sensibility applied across this, so that surveyors will now be able to come in, will be able to look at a property, assess it, and essentially exercise, I guess, a level of common sense, so that property boundaries will largely be where property owners expect them to be. And I think that's really crucial. I think if you think over the years of the type of problems that people have had over boundaries without earthquakes, often you'll see a fence that's been built where someone didn't expect it to be, and you have all manner of issues with hedges and all sorts of difficulties that people have with their neighbours over boundaries. It's really an ongoing issue for a long period of time, and I think it's, instead of getting down into sort of really nitty-gritty problems and sort of definitions of where boundaries should or shouldn't be, for surveyors to be able to kind of apply some common sense and get stuck into this, to ensure that where there's been this lateral movement, whether it's spreading or sideways movement of land, to be able to apply that level of common sense to ensure that boundaries are where people would expect them to be, in my mind, is incredibly sensible, incredibly practical, and will help sort of bring some resolution to these issues. And as usual, select committees, and it's a very hard-working select committee, of course, the Local Government and Environment Select Committee. They've had a lot on their plate recently, and I know they've put a lot of time and energy into this particular bill, and I want to commend all the members of that committee, especially the chairman, Scott Simpson. I think he's done a fantastic job in steering this bill through this process, to ensure that we get a good outcome. And there's been some amendments that they've made along the way, which I think are just entirely appropriate. So what was obviously a very good, practical, sensible bill in the first place, they've taken this a little bit further and ensured that there's been some improvements. And I guess in particular I want to draw attention to amending the clause 10 to specify that provided that the specified criteria are met, that there will be no liability for surveys and boundary determinations done in the interim period between the 4th of September and this legislation, because as we all know, it wasn't just one earthquake. There's been a number of earthquakes subsequently to those particularly devastating ones in September of 2010 and February 2011. And so it's important that we actually recognise that this has been an ongoing issue for a period of time since then as well. And I think, but of course this is not a blanket waiver of liability, and very sensibly they've looked at it and said that they obviously recommend this clause, the amendment to this clause in terms of the exemptions of liability, but does not exclude things like negligence or bad faith or misconduct or non-compliance with statutory obligations and professional standards. So this is not a blanket waiver of liability for surveyors. This is just to ensure that where they've made their best endeavours to do the best that they can between September of 2010 and now, where those lines that they have drawn have moved through subsequent earth movements, they're not being held liable for that. And I think it's eminently sensible. It's a practical approach, as I've said a number of times already, right across the board in this bill. So I do just want to commend the work of the Select Committee and for the Minister for bringing forward something that in a small way is going to help to bring some more resolution to homeowners in Christchurch who, without doubt, have been having all sorts of challenges over the last 5 or 6 years. This is a way that we can help them to put some things right, and I commend this bill to the House.
Porter Williams.